How useful would it be to find quick and easy ways of being able to detect how someone likes to process information so that you can then use the type of language which really suits them best? We've already looked at clean language as one way of doing that, and in this session I'm going to tell you about representational systems so that you can begin to get hold of the idea of how you can change the way that you language things to make sure that you fit in with your client or whoever you're talking to. In this way, you get to understand just how many ways you can make the interaction with the client as effective as possible. So, at the end of this session, you'll be able to firstly explain what is meant by representational systems. You'll be able to find out someone's preferred representational system, and you'll be able to use predicates to help create an even greater rapport and understanding between you and your client, and for that matter, with anyone that you meet. Up to now, we've thought about how once we've filtered information, we create our own internal representation. And this representation is either in pictures, sounds, feelings, tastes, smells, or self-talk, or as it is called in NLP, auditory digital. So, representational systems is the system by which you are storing a particular bit of information, and they are to do with our senses, although auditory digital is often included in this as well. And we've already heard about how we can tell which system someone is using to search for information at any point in time through the eye accessing cues. So if you remember, you can tell which representational system someone is getting the answer to a question from by watching their eyes. What you'll find is that people will often have one or two systems that are their preferred. These are the ones that they may use most often, or that they default to when things are not going so well, or when they're stressed. It's very useful to be able to detect what a person's preferred system is, so that you can use that system and the words related to that system with them when you're talking to them. This will mean that the rapport will be even greater, and they're likely to understand you much better. Each person will use all the systems at some time. So eye accessing cues are useful because they let you know which someone is in at any moment in time. However, it's often very helpful to know how best to approach someone in general, and that is where the preferred rep systems come in. So how can you tell what is someone's preferred representational system, and what are the ways of being able to detect that? Well, with people who have a visual preference, you may notice that firstly, they will often stand with their heads and their bodies very erect and their eyes up. They breathe from the top of their lungs and their upper shoulders and breathe fairly rapidly. They often sit forward in their chair and tend to be very organised, neat, well-groomed and orderly. And appearance is really important to them. So you'll find that they will wear clothes where the colours match and everything's in harmony. They memorise by seeing pictures and are less distracted by noise. So what's really important to them is the visual stuff, is the pictures. They often have trouble remembering verbal instructions because their minds tend to wander. And you'll find that they are usually very fast talkers. And they will say things like, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And they will use picture descriptions during conversations. And they're very interested in how things look. And it's really important for them to see things, for them to understand it properly. And they like visually based feedback. And you'll find that if they're making gestures, then they're very high up and they're very quick gestures that they use. On the other hand, someone with an auditory preference, then they will typically, their eyes will move from side to side. And as we found out with eye accessing cues, then they will move from one side for auditory remembered and the other side for auditory constructed. They breathe from the middle of their chest. They typically talk to themselves, and some even move their lips when they're talking to themselves. So you might find them sitting down and just, thinking things through, but you can actually see their lips moving as well. And they're very easily distracted by noise. So if there's any noise going on, then they will be paying attention to that. And so they get distracted by things like having background music in a restaurant, or if someone's doing some digging outside or something like that. They find it very easy to repeat back things to you, and they learn very easily by listening. They usually like music and using the phone and chatting on the phone. They tend to memorize by steps, procedures and sequences. So, they like to have to memorize things in a particular order and a particular process or a particular procedure. And if you're going to talk to an auditory person, then they like to be told what they're doing rather than being shown or actually doing it. And they respond to certain tones of voice or sets of words, so that the tone of someone's voice and the particular words that they use become even more important to an auditory person. And they will be very interested in what you have to say. And they are usually sort of medium to fast talkers, not quite as fast as visuals, but in the medium range. And they will often translate conversations to sounds that are associated with that particular topic. So if you are talking to someone about dogs, then very often they will associate that with barking. And then we have people who have a kinesthetic preference. So they breathe from the bottom of their lungs. So you'll see their stomachs go in and out when they breathe. And they will often move and talk very slowly. And they respond a lot to physical rewards and to touching. So kinesthetic people will love to have hugs or just to be touched and reassured that way. They memorize things by actually doing them or walking through something. So if they're learning something, it's really important that they have the chance to actually do it there and then, or at least to kind of walk through it all. They'll be very interested if something feels right. And they check out their feelings before expressing their thoughts or making decisions. So the interesting thing about this is that when it comes to decision making, then people with a kinesthetic preference very often are slower in making decisions than those with visual. And it's got nothing to do with intelligence. It's just that the kinesthetic processing takes longer, because when someone is in kinesthetic, what they have to do is to take in the information and then get a feeling from that, and then come back out with their opinion or with a decision. Whereas a highly visual person just has to very quickly see a picture and then they can make a decision. That's a much quicker process. So sometimes you will find that very visual people get a bit frustrated with highly kinesthetic people because they take time to make decisions and to think about things. And the other way around, kinesthetic people get a bit frustrated by highly visual people because they just rush through things, according to them. And you will find that kinesthetic people are usually very physical people, and they like to touch during conversations. And they like to use gestures, which are actually very low and quite smooth, where we had the visual ones being quite high and quick. So that's people with a kinesthetic preference. And I wonder if you know anyone like that. And finally, the characteristics you may find with people who have a preference for auditory digital are that they spend a fair amount of time talking to themselves and thinking things through, and working out the most logical, analytical and rational way of doing things. And they'll want to know if things make sense. And the auditory digital person can exhibit characteristics of all the other representational systems because, you see, auditory digital is actually a kind of second process, because we take in the information and we store it in our senses, and then we have to take it from there and then turn it into self-talk and thoughts. So it's a secondary process, and so they're very often good at doing the other ones as well. And you will find that they tend to speak in a clipped, crisp, monotone voice because they are thinking things through as they are talking to you and making sure that it is quite logical. And all the other representational systems, then the person is very associated because they're associated into that particular representational system. But the thing about auditory digital, people with that preference, you will often find that they are dissociated, so that they are, when they're in auditory digital, they are taking that step back. And people who have a preference for that spend quite a lot of time just having that step back, being slightly dissociated from what's going on with them. So, here's a little exercise for you to do. Which do you think at the moment is your preferred representational system? And how do you know that? You may find out more about this in the other exercises that we're going to be doing in this session. But for now, just jot down what you think is your preferred system and how you know that. And then you might like to jot down how you would change the way you communicate with someone if you wanted to do that in their preferred system. Firstly, if they were visual, then if they were auditory, then if they were kinesthetic, and lastly if they were auditory to digital. One of the ways you can change the way you communicate is by the words that you use, because our language will often let someone know which representational system we're in. Someone who's highly visual will say things like, "Oh, I see what you mean," because that's literally what is happening. They're seeing a picture in their mind of what you mean. Someone who is highly auditory will say, "Oh, I hear what you're saying." Whereas someone who's kinesthetic will say, "That feels right to me." And someone processing in auditory digital is likely to say, "That makes sense." All four phrases mean the same thing. It's just that they're being processed differently. So if you want to be in rapport with someone and fit in with their model of the world, being able to adjust your language to suit how they are processing is very helpful. And this is so important in coaching. Also, you will find sometimes that when people are having conflict with other people, if you are able to notice that they are talking in different representational systems, and you can do a translation between them, it often helps to sort out the conflict, because it's like they're talking in two different languages. Because one person will be saying, "Well, she just doesn't see what we've got to do here." And the other one's saying, "Well, it just doesn't feel right to me." And they're in two totally different representational systems. These words that are linked to representational systems are called predicates. So let's look at some examples of visual and auditory predicates. So people with a preference for visual are likely to use words like see, as we've already found out in "I see what you mean." Appear, that appears right to me. I can visualize that. That reveals a lot to me. I can imagine just how I'm going to do that. Can we examine this very carefully? Watch out where you're going. That feels a lot lighter. That shines a light on it. I'm in a dark place. That's brilliant. I can picture that. Can you illustrate that for me? Can you please just give me the highlights? That's very clear for me now. Whereas someone with an auditory preference may use predicates like, oh, I hear what you're saying. Listen to what I've got to say to you. That sounds right to me. That resonates with me. Silence is golden. We're in harmony. He was deaf to everything I had to say. I get a buzz from that. He accentuated all the words. Shouted out to the world. That rings in my ear. Tell me what to do. We're in rhythm now. And some examples of kinesthetic and auditory digital predicates. So kinesthetic, we've got words which either are to do with our feelings, so that feels right to me, or we've got words that are sensations like gentle, or we've got words which are to do with doing things, so get a grasp on yourself. So all of those three things come under kinesthetic. So we've got words like feel, break, and actors say break a leg, get a grasp of it. That feels solid. I'm stressed. She has very gentle mannerisms. Seize the day. In the rough and tumble of it all. Don't push me. My exams were really hard. We'll keep in contact. She rubs me up the wrong way. That makes it concrete now. Jump for joy. And then we have the auditory digital predicates. So they are words which are very to do with being logical, analytical and rational. So I'll consider that. I'll think about that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Can we evaluate this? How much will that motivate everyone? We need to learn how to do this. Can you describe what's going on? What process should we use? How will you know this? What's the connection between you and the rest of the team? How much memory will that take? Is that logical? How many more resources do we need? I can't conceive of that idea. And here are some phrases that you'll hear in each of the representational systems. Now let's do some exercises using predicates. So in this first exercise, have a practice at using predicates by writing a small story, say half a page, and write it using visual predicates. And then write one in using auditory predicates, and then kinesthetic ones, and lastly in auditory digital. Which one did you find the easiest? Which one did you find the least easy? It may be that the easiest is your preferred system and that the least easy is your least preferred. It's well worth putting more practice into the ones that are your least preferred ones, so that you get very flexible and very agile in being able to use all of them. Now in this next exercise, find a partner and ask them what their preferred system is. Find out from them about a project or a problem that they have at work. And as you're listening, notice what predicates seem to be the most important, and use those back to them in the questions that you ask. So for example, they may say, well, I've been working on this project for 2 months now, and I just can't see that I'm going to be able to finish it in time. So you may say, so when do you see it being finished? Or, what do you picture as a way forward with this? Do this for about 5 minutes and then swap over. So what were your discoveries and learnings from doing that? The more different people you practice on, the quicker being flexible in this way you'll become. And you'll find in the end that it just becomes an automatic thing that you do. You don't even have to think about it. So to summarize this session really, the first thing is that representational systems are the way that we store our internal representation of events. We may have a preferred system, and that's the one that we use more often or default to. And each system has different characteristics. And we can use our knowledge of a person's preferred system to communicate with them in the way that's best for them. And the words linked to a representational system are called predicates. And using predicates helps with rapport, and it helps to influence people, and it also, you can use them to help people change.